program begins with Dr. Cyree. He's the Dean of the School of Business Administration at Ole Miss. Dr. Cyree, always good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
I appreciate you having me, Gerard. Thank you so much.
You bet. I'm going to start with this one, Dr. Cyree. The relationship between the markets, the stock markets, and bond yields has been really fascinating the last couple of weeks. That seems to be rattling markets, rattling investors, and I think it's got certainly the financial industry as well has been taken aback of this. I can't remember the last time I saw them sort of going in opposite directions like that.
Yeah, I guess the word I would use is decoupled, right? Which is pretty rare. You typically will see them move together in opposite directions, but people are trying to figure out what it is they want to do. And certainly the downgrade last week or this week, whatever it was, from Moody's
Yeah.
created some issues there in the market. But there's been a lot of turmoil, I think, for the first part of this year, and this is just additional information that is causing more turmoil. So eventually, I do think it'll settle out, but it's been a kind of a wild ride so far this spring.
Yeah. The Senate now takes up the one big beautiful bill. As you know, it finally got the necessary votes, although just barely cleared the hurdle with a margin of one in the U.S. House. Headed over to the Senate. We were talking earlier. They need at least 50 Republicans. The vice president would be the tiebreaker should it come down to that. But they have 53. 5 have indicated that at this point they're a no. Senators Ron Johnson, he's called out, and Rand Paul have called out their concerns that the bill doesn't go far enough with respect to trimming spending and addressing deficits and then the debt. And then you got 3 other senators who have expressed concerns about the cuts to Medicaid. This is, I think, causing lots of angst in the business community. Businesses need some faith, confidence, and certainty.
Yeah, I agree. And depending on which side you listen to there, I saw Stephen Miller say basically, look, the cuts to Medicaid and Medicare and all the things they're looking at there are just removing some of the fraud and waste, which I'm a fan of that. And,
Yeah.
it's difficult to find out what the real truth is there. But I certainly, like most of your listeners, I'm sure, I don't like it when I hear fraud and abuse. I do think that needs to be handled. I don't know why that's a partisan issue. It seems to me anybody would say, yeah, I don't want 130-year-olds getting Social Security. I don't want fake people getting Medicaid, and I don't want people in 3 states on Medicaid that's the same person. That's been going on too, supposedly. So there's a lot going on there that I think needs to be cleaned up, and I'm just glad I'm not a politician, I guess. It's gotten pretty bare knuckled. It's like a free-for-all, at the end of a movie where everybody's just throwing haymakers. It's kind of crazy to me. You've got the Republicans fighting with Republicans, but I guess that's kind of where we are. And I
Yeah.
understand the sentiment from Rand Paul and Ron Johnson from Wisconsin that they want to see more cuts. But, there's an old saying, right? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So they need to figure out what can be done better where we don't have a continuing resolution again, but we start to make some progress. And, you can tweak it along the way. And I get that. And maybe they're in a position of leverage where they think they can get a better bill out of it. But not having a bill is worse than having a bill that's not perfect, in my view.
Yeah, totally agree. So I'm always curious and interested, Dr. Cyree, about what sort of discussions occur in the classrooms at the B School about public policy issues like this that are business related, such as the one big beautiful bill. When you're talking about taxes and tax policy, well, I mean, that's a huge part, and regulatory policy, it's a huge part of operating a business and affects our economy. What gets discussed? What sort of feedback have you received or heard about from students on this?
Well, typically that would be discussed in an economics course, probably more so than, say, a marketing course, but it
Sure.
impacts all of business. And so what you look at, for example, in my own personal class, I would bring this up and talk about the uncertainty piece of it. I would talk about the bond yields. So, as an example, if I were teaching class today, I don't know what today's Tuesday. It seems like it's Monday, but it's Tuesday. If I were teaching class this evening, I would probably start with looking at bond yields over the past couple of weeks, and then talk about why they look like they do, and then talk about what banks and other financial industry participants would do to try to mitigate some of this risk. And so that would be a really good conversation starter. But, I'm not sure what everybody does, but certainly there's a lot of things to discuss given what's going on in the economy and even in the political world. It really has become, Gerard, as you and your listeners know, where politics are driving a lot of what we do. I don't know that that's perfect for sure. I don't particularly like it, but I do understand that we're trying to make progress in some of these areas. And as I said earlier, I don't understand why we can't get together on the fraud and the abuse. That is puzzling to me. No matter which side you're on, and to be fair, maybe if the Democrats proposed that, the Republicans would reject it too and say it wasn't enough or something like that. But I would think we should be able to get together on that, though. So it's a little troubling to me.
Yeah, and what we're learning is since the Doge team has been in place is that a good bit of this waste, fraud, and abuse can be traced to these ancient IT systems that we have that we use to operate the government. I mean, no private business would be operating on platforms that are these old. And for example, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has talked about the project to modernize the IRS's systems. It's been going on since the 90s. I mean, technology's turned over numerous times since they started this project. They just keep paying money to third-party consultants without any results.
Yeah, I have had someone in the last year reach out kind of casually and ask me if I knew anybody who could program Fortran. And I said, well, I mean, I used to do that 30 years ago, but no, I don't know anybody who does that anymore because they had an antiquated system. And I guess they were trying to, I don't know what they were trying to do, but yeah, it's not a good situation there. But I would hope we're making progress, but boy, it seems like we're not. But hopefully, somewhere, some deals are getting. I will say, as you well know, the people that are actually trying to get things done and are talking offline, let's hope they're doing that. They don't make the news, or they don't get the sound bite. Uh, I mean, not that I don't, for example, enjoy John Kennedy out of Louisiana. He always has a few interesting comments to make that seems to go viral. But hopefully the people are doing the work in the background there to try to make some of this turn out where it's better for the American people, or at least that's what I would like to see.
Yeah, I think most level-headed Americans feel the same way about that. Let's talk about tariffs. What are your thoughts on that at this point? You saw the markets reacting very positively today as the president announced that the EU wants to come to the table and cut a deal, and then he also, as a result of that, said, okay, we're going to delay the 50% tariff by, I think, a month.
Yeah, I do think it's pretty clear now. I think the last time we talked, I was a little unsure whether or not this was a bargaining tactic, and I would say that certainly the bulk of the weight on what we're seeing out of the Trump administration is that it is a bargaining tactic. Although I don't think he's playing a game of chicken here. I think he means it, that if they don't come to the table, he will put them in place. So he's doing the art of the deal, I guess, and that I think that's good, and I think it's encouraging. And again, it's a topic where we should all agree that we should have equal tariffs or level tariffs across countries to the extent that you can calculate that right there on different goods. It's a little harder, but I think it makes sense. So I do like the way that it's going. It's been very disruptive, as we've talked about. One of the pieces of the turmoil and the uncertainty and the volatility of the markets is absolutely the tariff piece. But it does seem like we're making pretty good progress over the last couple of weeks anyway.
Somehow we got to get back to where fundamentals drive markets, such as profit and guidance along those lines, and not some of this public and fiscal policy. It just seems to be affecting it too much. And, of course, everybody watches the Fed. The markets have gotten to where they're just full-time Fed watching.
Yeah, there's an older article actually that I'm familiar with, and they went through a 50-year period or something like that, and World War II and all this stuff had less impact on markets, believe it or not, than the Federal Reserve, especially surprise cuts or raises in interest rates. really shocks markets worse than almost anything. That's just makes it's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense at all. But that's what people do. They try to figure out what the Fed's going to do, and because they think it's a very good signal about future policy, which it is. I agree with that, but I'm with you. I would like to see fundamentals. It really doesn't matter if rates go up or down 10 or 20 or 50 basis points.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether or not a good business can survive things like that. In fact, they've already planned for things like that if they're a good business, and they need to be able
Yeah.
to adjust. That's part of it. So
Yep.
you've got to have your team on their toes no matter what
Hang on,
comes.
Dr.
Be
Cyree.
prepared.
We got a break. Stay with us. We'll talk some more. Dr. Ken Cyree.
All right. Thank you, Gerard.
Studio, we're visiting with Dr. Ken Cyree. He's Dean of the School of Business Administration at the University of Mississippi. So, Dr. Cyree, we were talking before we went to break about just how focused markets have become on actions by the Federal Reserve. I mean, and just latch on to every word whenever they have a meeting, the Fed governors, and then, of course, the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell emerges and delivers remarks. And, they are focused, down to specific words they're looking for in his message. And you can watch the markets react to specific words. Like ongoing, I've read, is a word they always look for, depending on the context, of course. Have we gotten a little too consumed with the Fed?
Probably, but this has been going on quite a while. I remember. I'm old enough to remember. I don't remember the exact year, but there was a guy that made a living measuring through the video the size of the binder that the Fed chairman was carrying into the meeting, because he discovered the thicker the binder, the more likely a rate cut was coming, because they had to have evidence to cut rates, and that's been probably 30 years, which sounds ridiculous. And this guy was, that was after the fact, right? He was charging people money to tell him what, his prognostication, and he was pretty accurate, because that's the way he did it. We found out later was he was looking at the binder the guy would carry into the meeting. So it's been
awesome.
going on a long time.
Yeah.
So I don't think that it's a new thing, but it's something that it doesn't make a lot of sense. We just see. Really what's going on is people are trading, and what they're doing is short-term trading to try to gain an advantage over a very short time interval, sometimes as small as a few hours, right, rather than a long-term investor. And really long-term investors shouldn't pay that much attention to what the Fed does. I certainly should look at it somewhat, but trading on every word and hanging on every word and all of that is very much a short-term mindset. So I would hope that most of your listeners would not do that unless they're trying to make money in the short run, which is a dangerous game. It's like betting on sports, right? It works out great until it doesn't.
Yeah, day trading, not for the faint of heart. That's for sure.
Exactly right. All day traders got a new job. Mm-hmm.
So, any expectations of any rate adjustments in the offing? There's no consensus among economists and rate watchers on whether or not there will be any rates, or is it 1, is it 2, is it 5? It seems like the last couple of years they haven't been very accurate with their predictions.
Oh, they've been terrible. I do think we will see rates lower by the end of the year. Now, how many cuts, I don't know, but things could change, right? It's a dangerous business to forecast, because conditions on the ground change. We just don't know what's going to happen. For example, here's a scenario which is plausible. Let's suppose that Trump renegotiates a lot of these tariffs, and all of a sudden the economy really takes off. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Q3 GDP growth is 6%. I'll just be crazy and throw that out there. Well, then I think the likelihood of a rate cut's pretty small if that happens. And that would be the right call. So there are just so many factors out there that it's kind of a fool's errand to forecast and base long-term decisions on it. Now, I do understand that there are people who make their living with interest rates every day, and it's very important, and they are looking more long run, and they need to know what's going on in the short run to forecast the long run. But it's tough business. It just really is in this type of wild environment that we've been in for a few months.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So we can't have a discussion about the economy in business, and certainly from a public policy perspective, without talking about our deficits and our debt situation. This is something that Ron Johnson, Rand Paul on the Senate side have called attention to. Some of the Freedom Caucus folks on the House side have called attention to as well. But honestly, Dr. Cyree, just looking at numbers, I don't see a slowdown in these $2 trillion deficits. Now, Kevin Hassett from the White House says he does predict 4% plus GDP growth in the second half of the year. And, of course, I think we'd see revenues increase both in terms of corporate and individual income taxes if that were to occur. But just organic increases in mandatory spending will likely offset that.
Yeah, that's totally true. And as you know, in Washington, a cut in the increase is called a travesty and of epic proportions. Right. So there's very little appetite in Washington to cut spending, which is unfortunate. I definitely think there's some spending that should be cut. At a minimum, like I said earlier, the waste and abuse, you would hope that would be codified into something that would create a way to cut some of these agencies and their budgets down. But apparently there's not much appetite for that. And I think that's wrongheaded. But again, politics is a dirty business, it appears, and they're having a really difficult time coming together, even within the same parties, right? The Democrats are having trouble agreeing, and the Republicans are having trouble agreeing inside their own parties what to do, and we're kind of the ones stuck in the middle. And I just looked this morning by happenstance at the check I wrote the government on April the 15th, and it's an unpleasant thing to think about when you think about all this waste and abuse going on, at least in my mind. So I think that has got to be dealt with, and you would hope they could get together on that. Maybe it's just grandstanding, and they're all trying to win points politically, but hopefully by the end of the day they can get something for us that makes some sense to get rid of at least that. But I'm not optimistic about them actually cutting spending because they virtually never do.
And included in the One Big Beautiful Bill is a provision to increase the debt ceiling on the House side by $4 trillion. There's some Senate folks that want it to be $5 trillion. And there's some estimates that say, well, that'll carry us for less than 2 years, which means they believe that we're going to continue to have these $2 trillion deficits.
Yes. The argument is, right, it's kind of like the Reagan model where what you hope is that tax revenues go up because the economy booms, which is fine, and that absolutely could happen, and I think it's even perhaps likely to happen. But they spend a lot of. I saw a cartoon actually from Michael Ramirez, who's a cartoonist, that showed two drunken sailors. One was a donkey and one was a elephant, right? The GOP, and that said, yeah, we're both spending like drunken sailors, so or something similar to that. And I thought, boy, that's the truth. That we just cannot seem to get away from the spending. It's just that Democrats want to spend it on one thing and Republicans on the other. But you would hope that we could at least get some of this low-hanging fruit. But it's very difficult, apparently, Washington to cut spending.
How important is it, Dr. Cyree, that the dollar remain king among the currencies?
I think it is important, but certainly there would be other alternatives should something emerge, whether it's something akin to, say, Bitcoin or the BRICS nations. We've seen some movement there, but it certainly would create higher costs for the U.S., which is not good. It would diminish our buying power globally, which is also not good. But it might also force our hand on a few of these issues that apparently we're having trouble getting over the finish line. So it would be very strong, difficult medicine to swallow if we had to do that. And I'm hopeful it will not happen, but it certainly could. And I'm hoping that the policymakers in Washington are looking at that and thinking about what we can do to try to mitigate that issue, because it would be very difficult to get through. I don't think it's entirely devastating if something like that happened. I think we would be okay. We just wouldn't be in a position of power like we have been for 50 years.
Yeah, I think the saving grace is, even though there may be some devaluing of our currency, especially with the debt and the credit ratings, the other countries are in worse shape than we are for the most part.
Yeah, we're the least bad choice of all the bad choices at the moment, which is not great, but that's kind of where we are, and we've got to get a handle on this spending and the deficit, and I would be willing to use several approaches there, but it is a real problem, as we just saw with the downgrade, and a real problem with all of the issues that you've mentioned during this conversation. So we've absolutely got to get a handle on it. We've been kicking the can down the road for 60 years, and at
Yeah.
some point the bill will come due. And I just hope we don't have to shove that onto our grandkids. That's I don't think that's ideal.
Yeah, I totally agree. Dr. Ken Cyree, Dean of the School of Business Administration at Ole Miss, has been our guest on Middays. Always good to talk to you, Dr. Cyree. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too, man. We're coming right back in the